and tell them we don't want it into weapons or fossils, this is really a good start. The second thing is, of course, to, as I said, join us and try to get all financial institutions out of fossils. I think on concrete campaign ideas, I just don't want to elaborate too long on it, but the power of finance campaigning, so what you really can achieve, will my colleague Heffe tell you in the webinar right after. And on the last session on Friday, we also going to give you some examples in concrete campaigns we're doing, or our partners in the finance NGO world are doing.
And also tying into that, how can we, so now we know how we can more or less stop our money from funding the fossil fuel industry. And now the question is obviously, if we need to talk to our bank and maybe if we need to take our money out of that bank, how can we manage our money without funding that industry? And is there a list of asset management organizations and banks that have strong environmental credentials? Or is there any kind of list that tells you where or what good insurance companies are?
So at the moment, it's really a bit different for the type of financial institution. So the network, which is looking into insurances in particular, and some of my colleagues are part of that, is Unfriend Coal, they call. So on the Unfriend Coal page, you can also see the ratings for coal exclusions from different insurance companies. So they can at least tell you who's the best in class. Yes, I can put that in the chat to everyone. I thought I should mention them before. It's good you're asking about them. And then a list of good banks to invest in. I mean, I know we have that for Germany with our organization. I'm not sure of anything international. I'm also not aware of the green kind of finance world of UK, I have to admit. I know that Triodos Bank is a bank which is operating in several companies, several places in Europe. And then depending on the country you're looking at, there's more. But as for the UK, I really can't tell you, I'm afraid. Maybe somebody else has a good idea and can put it in the chat.
I can actually say something about Triodos. So Triodos is in the UK. But apart from that, there's not really anything green that I personally am aware of. But there's a really good following up question from Richard asking, following on from the AXA question, which would you say are the best asset managers, banks or insurance companies when it comes to phasing out fossil fuel financing, and which are the worst? Also, which countries are most or least progressive on that? That's quite a broad question.
Yeah, it's a broad question. I can answer pieces of it, I guess. So when you look at regions, who's really like leading is the Nordic countries and France when it comes on exclusions. So next to AXA as an insurance, also German Allianz has some things in place. I think they're not so bad on that, but as I'm campaigning against them, I cannot say too much good about them, but they're not as far as AXA, but they did quite a bit. They got quite a bit of pressure and moved. But of course, that's also a giant. Yeah, I don't know if people here on the call really want to have their insurance as one of these giant companies. And also to say here, big difference to AXA is that Allianz is not applying this to third parties, their policies, and they're actually a huge asset manager because they own PIMCO and US asset managers. So here again, for own assets, Allianz is good, for others it's not. Yeah, then the Nordic countries, also for banks, I think really state of the art here, or like the leading is Crédit Agricole and Crédit Mutuel. So the French banks, they have really good call policies whom they're applying now. So see how good that works. But I think this is the best examples we have here. Have a look. So worst of the worst. I guess if you look at size, it's of course, in the US, JP Morgan Chase is a bank and BlackRock as an asset manager. And in the UK, I'd say it's Barclays, and Nicole is going to tell you more about that tomorrow. They are the biggest fossil fuel company in Europe, biggest fossil fuel bank, I'm sorry, in Europe.
All right. We just had someone saying something about how you can best influence company, or how you can influence banks or asset managers in a good way. And that person, just looking at the name, Paul, he said that he works for an asset manager, and that the reason why that asset manager is actually looking into sustainable investment is now because people from within the company are now pressuring or putting pressure on the board. And that's a really good point I think we should also make. Also, someone asked what the name of the UK Green Bank was. That's Triodos.
Yeah,
I'm just looking at any other questions.
I put Triodos in the chat. And I also want to mention, I mean, as said, this is going to come later in the week though, but definitely if you look at, also if your aim when campaigning is not the finance world as a whole, yeah, but it's really more like how banks are working, then you can definitely have a win, like talking to the people working there. Some they are also not aware what the money of the bank is doing, and when they hear about it, they're shocked. And we from the German campaigns we do here, we have people in the banks who tell us what they think is great, and there are sometimes people who give us information also because they think it's great what we're doing and they want their employer to become better.
Yeah, I think. Please ask any more questions if you have any.
There's somebody mentioning here the Co-op and the Smile Bank. Don't know if you know them, but it seems to be UK green banks.
I looked into Co-op a few months ago when I was myself trying to figure out where to best move my money to. And Co-op is quite good, but it's still like I personally do not know of any exclusion criteria they have. I just know that their structure is, so they are structured in a way that they are less likely to invest a lot of money into fossil fuels. But they're definitely not safe to say a green bank. They're just better than the worst banks in the UK. So if you're looking to move your money out of a very, very dirty bank in the UK, Co-op would be an alternative, but I cannot guarantee you that it's a green bank personally. And Smile Bank, I personally have never heard of before. But I find it really fascinating that people are now sharing their experiences and their knowledge about which green alternatives there are in the UK. So it would be really amazing if we could continue that conversation on the Facebook live stream, maybe after this stream. It's also been mentioned the Ecology Building Society, for example. I'm just looking if there's any more questions.
Yeah, there's one. Does divestment from fossil fuels mean moving away from shares and bonds, or does it include loans also, from Johnny? So we use it as a whole. As when we talk about divest, especially as a slogan, we mean cut all financial ties to these institutions, be it in insurance, underwriting, loans, or whatever kind of service and support you could give as a financial institution to these companies. And we use it in German, the same word and the same way.
And then there's a very broad question. I don't know what Kathleen really wanted to know from you there, but she's asking if you know anything about Canadian banks, like where they rank in terms of investments.
Not from the top of my head. I'm not aware of any Canadian bank with a good policy. I think I wouldn't know that. Yeah. But
I think that's a very broad question.
Yeah, it's a very broad question. I mean, one thing you can do for now, if you want, I'm going to put you in the chat a link to our financial research, and you can look if the investor or bank you are interested in is popping up there. The financial research is just on financing, so all kinds of financing to coal power plant developers. So it's just a share of the coal industry. but it can give you an idea. Maybe you find the Canadian banks you're thinking about there. And that can tell you some more.
And then there's another question asking, where does money from health insurance go? Just to elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah, I will just put this call exit finance data to make some advertisement for us, of course, here in the chat. So the health insurance, in the end, yeah, the health insurance can invest in death, in weapon companies, in fossil fuel companies. It's really crazy, but that's the way it is. So they have their own money, of course, but also the money they get, they have to put it somewhere. They're also not going to put it just in a safe somewhere to wait there, but they want it to work, to generate more money, also to pay you out if you need the insurance to be paid out at some point. And because that is so crazy, I think is one reason why the Unfriend Call campaign, so the campaign which is working on insurances, is quite successful. Because it's mind-blowing. Yeah, you have insurance companies which insure against climate risk and invest in NTPC, and so it's very easy to make that point. Also, yeah.
Yeah. So Kathleen elaborated, saying that she meant banks' investments in fossil fuels, because after all, Canada has lots of tar sands, which really is true. And yeah, as Katrin's already said, doesn't really know a lot about that from the top of her head. But I think it's safe to say that tar sands in Canada are a massive problem. And it's not only Canadian banks banking on tar sands in Canada, but it's also Barclays, for example, is heavily invested in tar sands in Canada. So we can not only look at the banks from the country, but also the UK banks have a massive impact on tar sands. Just to say a few words on that.
Yeah, sorry, home office and real life. Sorry. You've been talking about some of these. I'm going to read some of the questions.
Yeah, I was just commenting on someone's comment about tar sands in Canada and investment in them. And I'm just going through questions. Please put them in the chat. We've got time for one or two more questions, and then we're already done, basically.
See what I can answer quickly, or also to the amount which I know, because I said I'm not a finance expert. I really look at the finance industry from a campaign lens and what's important there. And my daughter says hello. So how is the level of finance raised through debts versus equity determined? It's just simply something we saw, we experienced, and we heard from banks and companies. That's just the way it is. If you do a big infrastructure project, you will not take the risk and pay it with your own cash of the company, but you will finance it mainly by debt. So this is just what we heard from talks to different institutions. So, and then what factors determine the interest rate on bonds? Different factors, so to say, very different factors. So what can it be? Also, of course, the credit, also the rating of the issuer is one thing. The maturity rate, if it's tradable or if it's not tradable. So also technicalities, and yeah, and maybe also credit default swaps. I don't know.
I think we can actually wrap it up here, unless there's any last words you want to say, Katrin. I think this was a really fascinating conversation, and I think we definitely took a lot away from all of these new words and everything that's basically happening behind closed doors.
Yeah, basically to say, I think we record this video, so at least the slides will be available online as the webinar, and I'd assume we can also have them somewhere in the public space and should be all linked under the webinar then. Otherwise, I put in, as I said, I put in here callexit.org. You find some more info on the coal industry, on the financing also. And you'll find also in the partners tab a huge list of partners who work on finance one or the other way, maybe also from a country you're interested.
And if there's any more questions you have, you can always go to the Urgewald website, which is urgewald.org. Our logo with our name is on all of the branding of this webinar series. So if there's trouble spelling it, you can find it there. Other than that, thank you so much, Katrin, for taking your time in home office. I know it's a stressful time for you.
I'm not going to complain. It's all good.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Just to let you know, we have 2 more sessions happening today. Next one will start in half an hour, and it will be on the power of finance campaigning. The speaker will be Hefa Schücking. She's the director of Urgewald, and she's got experience in this sector for over 28 years. So that's going to be a fascinating webinar. And after that, we'll have Gail Bradbrook in conversation with XR Youth. And tomorrow, as Katrin has already said, we'll have 2 webinars, one on HSBC and one on Barclays specifically. And then there will be one after that on the practicalities of getting to carbon zero. If you want to know what's happening later in this week, please go onto the Extinction Rebellion homepage and click the Alone Together banner. Halfway down the following page is a big link to the Reset TV program, where you can find out what's happening the rest of the week. And other than that, thank you a lot for joining, and hope to see you